This is my video about the biggest threats to every card game. The card games I like to talk about in my videos tend to be very old. Magic the Gathering is over 30 years old, Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently hit their 25th anniversary, and Hearthstone is over a decade old on its own. Which is a lot of the reason why I tend to talk about these card games. The fact that they're so old shows the staying power behind the designs of the cards that they put into their game. Many other card games can simply not stick around and last as long as the card games that I like to talk about in my videos can. This leads to a massive card game graveyard full of dead card games that were abandoned by the creators or simply have not enough player base to support them anymore. Games like Netrunner, Game of Thrones, Chaotic, Star Wars, the trading card game, and Legends of the Five Rings are all card games that I remember from my youth that are no longer around. There are so many more card games that aren't even on this list that have gone out that it would take forever to even go through them all. Some of these games never end up getting off the ground, only existing for less than a year before they are shelved forever. Some last a bit longer, being able to last for many years and gaining a devoted player base where something or another will come along that'll stop them from being played. Any TCG, however, can be abandoned. Many TCGs run for almost a decade and then will be left alone for whatever reason. This means that the biggest threats to all the TCGs should be looked at, and that's the point of the video I have for you today. First, let's talk about Magic the Gathering. So, after Magic has hit its 30th year anniversary, it is already and has officially been made the oldest card game. But what are the threats that could end Magic as the game we know today? In my opinion, it is the current Universes Beyond and has been coming out repeatedly over the past few years in Magic. For those who don't know what Universes Beyond is, it is effectively cards that you can play in Magic, but with characters or ideas that come from different IPs, such as Assassin's Creed or Lord of the Rings. However, generally crossovers are loved by fans, so what is the problem with bringing in other IPs into Magic the Gathering? The threat in an aspect of what it is to Magic the Gathering as a game is a general focus less on Magic and more on the crossovers or other games or genres that are brought into Magic the Gathering. If we look at a slide published by Wizards of the Coast, it shows the future of Magic and how more and more of the Magic the Gathering sets will be replaced by crossover sets such as Final Fantasy or Spider-Man. This is a good way to get new players into your game in what I like to call the Fortnite effect, as Fortnite was one of the first games to have such a massive amount of crossovers coming into the game, a great way to introduce people from those other archetypes into your game of Magic the Gathering. The issue here, to me, is really an issue of scale. There's only so many Hatsune Mikus or different genres of things you can bring into Magic the Gathering while reducing the amount of actual Magic into your game until your game becomes more of a hodgepodge of different ideas than a single game that people can build around. This will help to have a lot of a loss of a core audience of Magic the Gathering players as the more enfranchised players grow disillusioned with new things being added to their game, and the more added players in that are new players only stick around when there are cards or aspects of the games that originally brought them in the first place. This degradation of enfranchised player, in my mind, is the biggest threat to Magic the Gathering as a whole, as these enfranchised players are the players that end up actually bringing in new players into the game and are the ones that you can sell cards to over and over again over 30 years. If these players end up quitting your game in droves because there is simply not enough content for them to latch onto, and a lot of the content ends up being a crossover with a card they don't care about, like Hatsune Miku, you're going to end up having a lot less product going out, making a lot less money, and having a much smaller player base, even though a lot of the players coming in end up being new. Now we're on to Yu-Gi-Oh! So, what could end up ending Yu-Gi-Oh! As a card game itself? In my opinion, it's the old mind of all the players. There are so many players who play Yu-Gi-Oh! Who are incredibly devoted and got in on the ground floor of Yu-Gi-Oh! When it originally came out. Now, having a lot of devoted players to your game should be a good thing in theory. It seems like the exact problem that Magic is going to end up losing and something that Yu-Gi-Oh! Can take advantage of. However, there are some issues with the way Yu-Gi-Oh! Is built right now that makes this a problem. There are two types of player who typically end up playing Yu-Gi-Oh! You have competitive players that play with cards like Infinite Impermanence and are there for the core competitive gameplay, and then you have casual players that came from watching the anime or from one of their friends recommending it who just want to give the game a try and play for fun. The biggest problem facing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that both of these aspects do not do a good job bringing new players into the game in a way that will make them stick around and be satisfied with the playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Experience. The best thing they have at the moment is Master Duel, which has a whole host of issues, especially when it comes to introducing new players to the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! This new player problem, as I phrased it, comes in many different ways in Yu-Gi-Oh! First is that Yu-Gi-Oh has an absolute ton of mechanics. There are link summons, there are ritual summons, there are synchro summons, there are XYZ summons, there are pendulum summons. There are so many different mechanics in Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, having a lot of mechanics is fine. Many card games have it, but when you start actually reading the Yu-Gi-Oh cards, you find that there's a lot of issues that come up from the mechanics that are put into Yu-Gi-Oh itself. The first I want to point out is that there are tons of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh that have lots of hidden text, otherwise known as text that you can't read as the player playing it or as the player playing against it. Cards like Wanted, Seeker of Sinful Spoils lets you search your deck for a Diabell Star monster and put it into your hand. Now, the problem is that you don't know what a Diabell monster is if you are on the opponent's side unless you know all of the Diabell Star monsters. And if you're a new player playing the game, when you play this card, you'll have an option of Star monsters to get, and you don't know which is the best one to start with if you haven't had a lot of experience playing this deck. This in itself is a problem, but is further compounded by the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh has Disruption, which is based off of this hidden knowledge. Cards like Ash Blossom of Joyous Spring have the ability to counter effects like Wanted, Seeker of Sinful Spoils. However, if you are the player playing against Wanted and you have no idea what your opponent is going to search or what your opponent's deck is trying to do, you will have absolutely no context on whether or not it is good to use Ash at this point in their combo or at a future point down the line when they play a more threatening searcher. In this sense, Yu-Gi-Oh players are effectively forced to study all the decks that they could conceivably play against in the metagame to have a good chance of winning or playing for fun at a tournament. This way, if you are not experienced enough in Yu-Gi-Oh, you will simply get destroyed early on with no idea what happened because you do not have enough knowledge about your opponent's deck and what they could plan to do. These are a few of the things making it hard for new players to get into the game and only scratch the surface, in my opinion, on what things new players have to grapple with if they want to learn to play the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now we're on to Pokemon. So, what is the thing that could end up ending Pokemon in the near future? Nothing, realistically. Pokemon in the current day, in my opinion, has effectively no threats in terms of what could end up happening to Pokemon to end the card game altogether. You may be wondering why this is the case, and in my opinion, it's because Pokemon has two aspects that are core to it that will keep the game alive for a very, very long time. Similarly to the previous two games I've talked about, Pokemon has a competitive aspect with people playing cards like Rare Candy and trying to beat their opponent as fast and efficiently as possible, and Pokemon has a more collector casual aspect with people collecting cards not only because they want to have a large collection, but because they may like the artwork on the card. Interestingly, Pokemon helps both of these groups by having them feed into one another in a really interesting way, having both halves of the player base have options to transfer over to each other's side easily. There are many cards, like Skyla for example, which are both competitive mainstays, but also are very nice to collectors, meaning that these cards serve double duty in being a card that collectors and competitive players want to buy, making the price high and very good for the card game overall. Not only does the Pokemon card game have this great balanced aspect that keeps it alive on both halves, but Pokemon is also absolutely huge outside of the card game itself. Pokemon has an anime that's been going on for a long time. Pokemon has had the video games, obviously, have been coming out forever. Pokemon has Pokemon Go, which was a worldwide phenomenon when it came out and is still played by many people today. You know about Pokemon. I don't have to explain to you what Pokemon is. If you are basically anyone on planet Earth, you probably heard of Pokemon at some point. One of the genius designs behind Pokemon, though, is the fact that all of them don't rely on the games to be good. They only rely on the Pokemon released in the video games to draw from in terms of the anime or Pokemon Go or the card game itself. This way, even if mechanics or the Pokemon in the games that are added to end up being bad or unliked, they can still find other life in other forms of the game, such as Charizard here not being a mainstay in the Pokemon games, being a super strong card in the card game because they can design around it however they like. This means Pokemon can retain an incredible amount of resilience despite lowering quality of other aspects. If the Pokemon games end up being lower quality than the previous games released in the series, it doesn't matter much to the card game or the anime because they stand on their own as Pokemon products without relying on the game for source material. In my opinion, Pokemon is not going anywhere, and if I was to pick a card game to stick to for my entire life, I would definitely pick Pokemon, as I do not see it going anywhere anytime soon. Finally, for Hearthstone. So, what is something that could end up ending Hearthstone in the near future? In my opinion, it's the Demon Seed, which is a card that already exists and is definitely a bad sign for Hearthstone. They sort of already have done stuff to help kill off the game, if you ask me. In my opinion, the biggest threat to Hearthstone right now is a metagame stagnation, otherwise known as the fact that Hearthstone does not change very much from expansion to expansion in a way that is meaningful to players. There are many potent and loved metagame staples over the years of Hearthstone's lifetime that can be remembered by players on and on throughout the years. Cards like Ragnaros, cards like Gen Greymane, cards like Patches the Pirate are loved and hated by large portions of the player base. However, Hearthstone needs to receive a lot of love to make these cards iconic and yet not have them be overpowered and metagame centralizing. Certainly over the recent years, you can see a lack of love from Blizzard coming to the game of Hearthstone itself, and you can really see this in terms of the power creep that has been going on in the game. A slow rise in the level of power of cards that see play in the top decks of the metagame. This power creep really needs to be kept in check by Blizzard in order to not run out of design space to make interesting cards in the game. If the power level of the cards is too high, a lot of interesting cards that could have seen play will simply be unable to be made because there are too good cards that push them out and stop them from seeing play. While power creep could be reduced after the failure sets that came out that tried to lower the power level of sets in the future, as Grand Tournament and Rusticon's Rumble did, Blizzard was really unwilling to print any sets that didn't have large impacts on the metagame of Hearthstone overall. This constant uptick in power creep and lack of powering down of other sets limits the future design space designers can use as the cards become more and more powerful and more niche or interesting options get further and further limited by the different cards that are already in the game. You can really see this come to a head in the set United in Stormwind, which is the most powerful set that Hearthstone has ever seen. It really shows the upper bounds of what players are willing to take in terms of what power and abilities cards are allowed to have in the game of Hearthstone. Many of the cards and aspects from this set made a lot of players leave the game because the power level had simply become too high and the game simply became too unbalanced for them to be willing to play it anymore. Without a lot more care given to the game by Blizzard, it is simply inevitable that more and more of these unbalanced sets will come out, forcing more players away from the game as it is simply not fun for them to play anymore when the cards that they used to play with and enjoy simply no longer exist. Also, as a side note, Blizzard as a company sucks now and has completely imploded, meaning that the care that Hearthstone really needs is less and less likely to come unless it is bought by another company or something along those lines. However, it's not all doom and gloom when it comes to card games dying off, because every time a card game dies off, it leaves new room for new card games to come up and rise and take over the space that that game left. A great example also from Blizzard is Overwatch. Overwatch, a super big hero shooter that came out, however, it is mostly being eclipsed right now by Marvel Rivals, which has recently come out. As Overwatch has declined over the course of the years, it leaves space for a game like Marvel Rivals to come in and scoop up that player base that loves the Overwatch feel but wants to play something new and is no longer satisfied with the experience that Overwatch gives them. There are tons of great games that I think would definitely benefit from an influx of new players coming from a large dying card game. Games like Legends of Runeterra or Marvel Snap are both games that I loved playing. However, I think that they would have both been much more successful and much better if they got an influx of new players by either coming out earlier when these big card games had originally come out, or if one of them bites the dust, they can scoop up a large amount of those new players from those old card games. But if you are one of those diehard fans who loves all of these card games that I talked about today, I remain extremely hopeful about the 4 card games that I ended up talking about today. These games have all survived many different disasters over the course of the years of their living. So even while Magic may become less and less Magic and have more and more crossovers, and even though Master Duel is a travesty in terms of a new player experience and has a hard time bringing in new players, and even though United and Stormwind did come out and crush a large portion of the Hearthstone player base, I still remain hopeful. The developers of these games still stay around and have clearly done some core things in these card games to make players stick around for so long. And that is why, even through these trials and tribulations, I believe that these card games will hold fast and be able to remain as good card games into the future. Also, if I didn't make it clear enough in the video already, I think that everyone should at least try playing the Pokemon trading card game. This game, I think, is going to stick around for a long time and has clearly been given a lot of care by the developers of the game to be both accessible to new players in a casual aspect and fun for competitive players. Give this game a try, it is worth your time. Thanks for watching the video. Remember to leave a like and subscribe so that way I can make more content in the new year just like this one. Let me know if you guys like the new background color. I tried to darken it a little for my viewers who like to fall asleep to videos like this one, so if that's you, let me know in the comments. Also in the comments, let me know how you feel about the future of the card games I talked about in this video. I would love to hear your opinion about it in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.